Hi, and welcome back after the break. In this session on the Bride of Christ, we are actually discussing, I think, the most important information for our time coming from Christ's teachings. When he got to the last week of his life, he gave two parables on the wedding. Okay, one in Matthew 22nd chapter, and again in Matthew 25. And I want to humble myself. I'm doing this in high appreciation for Hebrew Nation Radio, and I'm sad that I've failed to point out the fact that I've used the term God. Well, they use Elohim because that's the Hebrew word for God, and El is the short form, like Daniel, Ezekiel. The El means God, and the Daniel means God is my judge. And I believe that we're coming to a time when we will have life and death issues, and God can be our judge as well. The thing in the Bible is that judges were deliverers. The book of Judges is about Samson and Gideon and other deliverers of God's people. And we can be part of that, similar, and we're looking forward to that time. But we need to understand his plan a little better in order to do that. And we've been looking at the first half of this broadcast. Was first half hour was a look at the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and the wedding messages that included the Exodus, the in Egypt, Matthew 22, Matthew 5, and Luke 12, verses 35 to 44. We also saw that Luke's wedding parable had half a dozen parallels to the Laodicean message, and maybe failed to cover everything then, but first of all, the big thing that I did not specify but alluded to is the fact that in a news thing, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, we did not really cover the when very well. A week ago in the Hebrew Nation Radio, we talked about how the time is fulfilled, and how that in the big strokes, it pointed to, I think, 2 years from now, 2023, after a sabbatical year, there will be a Jubilee type of event, just like Egypt. In Egypt, in Jubilee, Leviticus 25th chapter shows that people were freed from servitude, and they were given a promise of land. And that was in the 10th verse of Leviticus 25. Well, that's what happened in Egypt. They were freed from servitude and a promise of land. But America is like Egypt today. Egypt, as you know, enslaved Israel, but America has enslaved most people corporately in alcohol, tobacco, drugs, even medical care is a form of bondage, so that people need, and slavery also to negative lifestyles, gender issues, and things that were an abomination in Bible times. So we just need to understand how it will be appropriate if judgment comes to America that we had it coming, because not only have we enslaved people, but just as Egypt killed their babies and threw them in the river, we have aborted 62 million babies, thrown them in the trash can, and God is going to judge this country. And so the point is that Egypt was a Jubilee event, and Jubilees later came every 50 years, so to speak. The point is that 50 years from Roe v. Wade is 2023, and other events fit, as we explained last week in our Time is Fulfilled event. But that's only the year. It doesn't say about the day or time. Some people think you don't know the day or hour, Well, Christ was talking to disciples who didn't need to know, and he was really saying to them, you don't understand. That's the word eido, means understand. And each time he said it, he gave an example of a provision in their law for Passover a month later. Okay, a 9/11 provision. Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11. Okay, it provided if for example, that Israelites did not travel in winter, but if they took a long trip in the spring and they couldn't get back for Passover, they were to keep it the second month, a month later. Because why? Passover was symbolic of judgment, and nobody escapes judgment. We're all going to be judged at some point. So there was that provision in Numbers 9. If any man be in a journey afar off, he'll keep Passover the second month. Okay, same timing. So we need to understand that better. And for Christians who may be watching this video, they might not know the Torah as the Hebrew Nation radio broadcast does. That's the first spring month after the equinox, counting from when you see a new moon in the sky. I believe it's the visible new moon. Blow up the trumpet in the new moon. Well, were they looking at a dark sky with nothing there? No. We get that from NASA and astrology, etc. But really, the visible crescent was the sign, and I have seen modern events timed to that, so that yes, it endorses. Moses was probably looking at the sky when he saw the thin crescent, and God said to him, "This is the beginning of the month, the first month of the year to you," in Exodus 12, verse 2 and 3, actually. And they were to count 10 days and set a lamb apart for the sacrifice on the 14th, Passover. We don't have to kill lambs. We don't do Jewish ceremonies, but Yeshua instituted in its place, the service that memorializes his sacrifice, and that was the Lord's Supper, unleavened bread at that time, and the grape juice. So don't need to go into that fully, except that I want to give you what I'm saying. Christ said it, great teacher, half a dozen times. Okay, it begins with you don't know the day or hour, but as the days of Noah. Okay. Well, the days of Noah, it was the second Passover timing, second month. Why? Also because of a provision in Numbers 9, verse 10, 11. The 9/11 timing, by the way. I think God got our attention with the 9/11 because we all know 9/11 is a big deal. And I think what's coming is going to be big with 9/11 timing in the second spring month, okay, which turns out, in my opinion, May 5, on the eve of second Passover in May. May 5 is Cinco de Mayo, time of deliverance or winning, I don't know. Anyway, it's also on a Friday evening, so what excuse do Sabbatarians have not to watch and pray? They don't have to work the next day. They should recognize that the Passover will be the day similar as in the days of Christ when he was crucified. And he slept in the grave on the first day of Passover, first day of unleavened bread. Well, Hebrew Nation people believe, a lot of them believe that the spring feasts were fulfilled. In fact, Christians do too. They believe the spring feasts were fulfilled. Well, in the Bible, Leviticus 23, it calls for a feast of unleavened bread on the first day of Passover, a holy convocation. And Christ was dead in the grave. He couldn't convocate with anybody. That feast was not fulfilled at Passover when he died. He fulfilled it for us. I believe it's pointing to a time when events again will be fulfilled at those times, and there will be a judgment on the eve of Passover, and we will eat the feast of unleavened bread 7 days as a wedding feast. Okay, the wedding feast, unleavened bread. Why? Because God got an ignorant bride at Sinai that worshipped a calf 40 days later, and this must not happen to Yeshua, the Savior. He deserves an intelligent bride who understands, and the feast days are part of that in the Torah. So we can be prepared and watching. The 7 days of unleavened bread are 7 topics of that need to be restored. Christ said in Matthew 16, verse 12, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees," meaning their doctrines. And preachers today have leavened the bread. So we need unleavened bread, and it includes an understanding of the covenant and the statutes and judgments. This is Elijah. In Matthew 17:11, Christ said before he comes, Elijah will come and restore all things. And we see clearly in Malachi 4:4 and 5, remember the law of Moses with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I send you Elijah. So Elijah is going to be restoring those statutes and judgments. And they have a sevenfold emphasis in Ezekiel 20, verses 11 to 24. It's statutes, judgments, Sabbath, statutes, judgments, Sabbath, statutes, judgments, Sabbath. So we can be assured that those are part of what needs to be restored. And I'm seeing that other things that have a sevenfold emphasis also need to be restored, like God's name. In Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments, you will find Lord in all caps 7 times as a mark of end-time truth, because translators took God's name, ripped it right out of the text, and substituted Lord, a generic title. Shouldn't have done that. Christ said, not one jot or tittle will pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And why did they take the yods? Jot is a yod, okay? And they took the yod, first letter of God's name is a yod. And they took, I would not want to be the translators of any Bible when Judgment Day comes, because translators did a bad thing. They were coming from a Catholic background or a Jewish background, but God wants his name known. Solomon, when he built the temple, said he dedicated it to God's name because that all nations might know thy name. Today, almost nobody knows his name, okay? And we'll prove this later when we get on that topic. It's the first topic of unleavened bread. And I do know the names, but if I use God or Lord or Christ, I'm doing that in deference to Christians, because if I said Yahweh, they might run, and we'll talk about that later. In fact, I think there's more to learn about that than most even Hebrew Nation people know. We'll get to that later. Anyway, I want to share with you on the topic of. I started out talking about the 9/11 provision for second Passover. As the days of Noah, the flood came with Passover timing, but at the second Passover in the second spring month. And you might think, well, that's just a coincidence, not important. But the next parable begins, then shall two be in the field. If it's then, it's the same time. Okay? So is timing important? I think when Christ's use of the word then suggests it is important. He said in Matthew 4:4, we shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And then is part of his words. it's when. Then is when, so to speak. And the next parable is not a quick snatch to heaven, 2 in the field, 1 taken, the other left. Because if you go to Luke 17th chapter, the last 2 verses, the disciples asked, when Christ said, 1 will be taken, the other left, they said, where, Lord? Where are they taken? And his reply was, where the body is, the eagles will be gathered. That's not a snatch to heaven. That's the dinner of the birds in Revelation 19th chapter, around verse 17 and 18. I don't want to go there. Meat for the vultures? No. We can do better than that. But if we aren't watching, we might not. So we need to know when to watch. Second Passover is the time to watch and pray, to be protected. And the next parable after that, you don't know, but if the goodman had known, he would have watched and not suffered his house to be broken. Well, I like the King James on this one, because King James only has one reference to goodman in the Old Testament to help us know. And it's in Proverbs 7, verse 19 and 20. The goodman, if he has gone on a long journey, he's taken a bag of money and he won't be back to the Yom Casey. Full moon is Yom Casey. Passover comes on a full moon, but long journey is a specific clue for second Passover, as we mentioned just earlier in Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11. If you take a long journey, you can't get back, keep second Passover. And I think all Christians today are on a long journey to truth. It's zigzag, zigzag. The truth is here, the truth is there. And we also, the other provision in Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11 is for contact with a dead body. And Christians have been in contact with a dead body, a dead church body, that doesn't read the Word, the Old Testament, and understand it a lot. There's more for us, and we will look at this during the Feast of Unleavened Bread or later in this series that I'm giving. So I want to just talk now about the role of the bride of Christ, because it's, I believe, high importance to us to understand our roles. It's our script. When you're in a play, you need to read your script and understand what you're going to do at certain times. And I believe that if we don't do that, we won't be there. We may be so sincere, but I think the Bible is complex in its picture. God could have spelled everything out in Genesis, that my son's going to die on a cross. But he wants us familiar with his Word as history is unfolded. And he's had a message for different people at different times, and they didn't get it. The idea is, first of all, one of the biggest messages in the Bible was Noah. He preached for 120 years that God was going to destroy the world with a flood. Well, it had never rained. Okay, they thought he was crazy, but he knew he wasn't crazy, and his family knew he wasn't crazy. But his point is that we need to be God's people and give a message of warning, even if they think we're crazy. And it was as the days of Noah, second Passover for them. We're covering these things now, but I would just say judgment is coming like the days of Noah, and we can be spared. The different parables in Matthew 24 include the evil servant that begins to smite his fellow servants, and there's no specific timing in that chapter, but the next one begins, then will the kingdom be like 10 virgins, and then links it in timing, and the 10 virgins have this timing at the end of it when Christ says, watch, you don't understand or you don't know, it's like a man traveling to a far country. And that's that provision again in 9:11, Numbers 9 verse 10, 11 for second Passover. And it shows that the master who took the long journey to heaven is really about Christ. He took a long journey, and his return in judgment will be in harmony with his law that he said is in effect till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or tittle will pass from the law till all is fulfilled. So we're looking forward to a time of judgment. Like Egypt, death will fall, Passover timing, but second Passover, like a far journey, or like the days of Noah, okay, where Noah had contact with a dead body, and we've had contact with a dead church body. And we, by the way, may have contact with a dead body next year from the people who've had a shot for, trying to boost their immunity. I believe that millions could die next year because the shot is not what it should be. Don't want to go there or get my video taken down because of that. But please give the health stuff a look, and I have a book from lockdown to knockdown on Amazon that has interesting information even in the introduction. You don't even have to buy my book. Just click look inside and navigate to the introduction, and you can read it with some links there that are helpful. I believe you can do that, and it's if you go to Amazon, type in my name, Richard Ruhling, Ruhling, and you can see a book From Lockdown to Knockdown, The Fall of America. Well, this is because God's going to make a full end of all other nations, and America is the head of gold in Daniel 2. It gets it first, and then other nations as well. We might like to better understand the timing sequence for how this is all going to unfold, and it comes from Daniel's 8th chapter. Gabriel told Daniel that his vision of the ram and goat was at the time of the end. The Hebrew word is kazon, but it referred to the ram and goat. That kazon is at the time of the end. Well, pioneers 170 years ago thought that was strange. They thought that Alexander the Great's victory over the Medes and Persians where it had been fulfilled, but the horns on the ram are the kings of Media and Persia, and today those countries are Iraq and Iran. So we are at the time of the end. We've seen Iraq already, had war with it. We've broken that horn, and Iran will be next. And we might wonder, how is that going to be? Why we don't want war with Iran, but we should wonder what makes the goat angry to fight the ram in Daniel 8. Well, different passages help explain it, and in Zechariah 14:1 and 2, in the day of the Lord, which is the end time period when it begins, it says, nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle, the houses rifled, the women ravished, half the city will go into captivity, and then the Lord will go forth to fight against them. So we're going to see Muslims take the city, and they will be rejoicing. Their mosque in Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock, has an inscription that Allah has no son. When suddenly the biggest earthquake that has ever hit this planet erupts with Jerusalem as the epicenter, and those Muslims will get out of there. It says in verse 5, they will flee as they fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah. That was in Isaiah 6th chapter, when Isaiah was called to be a prophet, and I believe we can be called to be prophets if we are watching them. Okay, the call of Isaiah, it says, the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. I think it was filled with smoke because the censer tipped over, okay, in that earthquake. And back about 700 BC, something like that, calendars began changing, and suddenly it was no longer 30 days to a month, it was 29 and a half. Perhaps a close flyby sped up the earth in its orbiting planets. God shook the heavens and earth then. He says he's going to do it again. In Joel 3:16, the Lord will roar from Jerusalem, the heavens and earth will shake. And I believe that will initiate the end time, when God will, it says in Isaiah 2:21, he will shake terribly the earth. It will give the message, fear God, because so many people don't fear him now. And we need to fear him and want to obey him. And it's just going to do it once. He doesn't stand over us with a whip all the time. You know, when I was, this is now nearly 50 years ago, when I started a residency for internal medicine, and my little boy was standing nearby when I told my wife she ought to have slippers on because the floor is cold. My little boy came running with slippers, and he said, "Here, Mommy." Well, if I had said, "I'm going to beat you if you don't get Mama's slippers," it would give me no joy. But it gave us all joy to see him get it and do what he could to help Mommy. And I think God is wanting not to stand over us, you got to do this, you got to do this. He could prove himself easily. But he doesn't want to force us. He wants us to learn the lesson and learn to trust him. And if we do, there's great joy in our hearts as we learn that he stands behind his word, and it's not about making us do this and making us do that. It must be voluntary, and we will praise him forever for his love and his provision for us and our needs. And this is how we are prepared for his service in the end time. So we need to get it. Marriage, that wedding parable is great happiness if we get it right, or great sorrow if we don't. And we need to understand what he wants from us in terms of unleavened bread, the feast days of when it's going to be. He will judge. I believe just as Titus came at Jerusalem at Passover, the Muslims will do that at Passover time. But second Passover, 1 month later, is when the Lion of Judah will roar, the heavens and earth will shake. And if we're watching on that evening of May 5, I believe we can open to him with a feast of unleavened bread. That's Luke 12, verse 35, 36, 37. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord finds watching. He will gird himself, make him sit down to eat, and serve him. Well, we will be like the disciples when Christ served them. They thought it was great, but they went to sleep later on him, and they ran when they should have stayed with him through the trial, testified in his behalf. things would have been different if it had been. So thank you for being with us. God bless you for understanding it, and we will see you again in another week. Thank you for like this and share it with others.